Hello Sofa Squad, it's me, Paul, with Reporting Live from my sofa. Welcome back to the channel. Now y'all, before we get started, don't forget to check out our podcast, True Crime Squad. You can find it on your favorite platform that you listen to podcasts on, and there are links down in the description below. Y'all, today we are going to be talking about a really tragic, a really sad case. This just wrapped up in court, and this video is going to be me just talking about the case, summarizing the testimony that we saw at trial, as well as going into some aspects that I wanted to dig a little bit deeper on. So let's go ahead and get started. Jessica and Daniel Groves of Scioto, Ohio, were charged in the death of their infant son, Dylan Groves. Now, the deputies alleged that the baby didn't even make it to 3 months old. I'm going to list off the charges that they were charged with going into trial now. Aggravated murder, kidnapping, endangering children, tampering with evidence, interference with custody, gross abuse of a corpse, as well as 4 separate charges of felonious assault. Now, baby Dylan was born January 10th, 2019. He was born with drugs in his system and taken away from his parents, although his father, Daniel, was awarded custody of him again not too long after that. The regulations that he said he would follow in order to gain custody of Dylan back all went by the wayside. Eventually, a search warrant was taken out, and this resulted in a 6-hour standoff of getting Daniel to surrender. The mother, Jessica, surrendered pretty quickly. Now, after some lies and covering up, Daniel eventually did lead authorities to where baby Dylan was at the bottom of a well in a makeshift coffin. Now, rescue workers that got him, one of them was overcome by the smell of decomposition. So let's go ahead and break the trial down and go over and analyze some things that took place during that. We're going to start with the state's opening. Now, the state gets up there and they outline all their charges, what those entail, and what they have to prove in order to get the conviction for those charges. Because remember, it is up to the state. It's their burden to prove these alleged charges against the defendants. Let's review the state's chain of events. Now, the state says that Jessica arrived at the hospital right before she gave birth. She wouldn't answer any questions. She appeared to be high. She claimed that there was no prenatal care, so they had no record or file on her. Now, the state says that it's going to be alleged that Jessica didn't know she was pregnant, but that there's also plenty of proof to prove otherwise. Now, the staff would not give her any kind of pain meds at the hospital because she was being so uncooperative, and essentially they could kind of tell, like, this is an addict. There's something not right here. Now, baby Dylan was born amazingly. There was really no serious complications. He did have to go and be put on oxygen because he was early, but they also noted, the staff hospital, and the state says that there will be evidence on the stand to show this, that neither parents even asked to go see baby Dylan. Now, a urine test was performed on the baby, and he did test positive for drugs, and he actually had to stay in the hospital for 5 days while the hospital, as well as like children's services, figured out something to do with the child, because at that point him going home with the parents was not an option. Now, initially they were going to put the baby with the father because he had a job, and they were like, well, he'll be able to test clean for drugs, but the mother, Jessica, can't live with them. The mother, Jessica, was going to have several stipulations. She was going to have to go to drug abuse counseling, supervised visits, so on and so forth. Now, the hospital still wouldn't even agree to those terms. They did not want this baby going home with either of these people. Now, they did end up testing the umbilical cord for drugs, and it came back with a plethora. In a moment, we're going to talk about the drug problem in this particular area of Ohio, because that will be brought up during the defense's opening statements. So on January 15th, baby Dylan was sent to live with a foster mother. Now, during this time with the foster mother, he was seen twice by social services, and there was no injuries. He was fine. He was progressing well and coming off of drugs, as well as one could expect a little baby to do. By January 28th, for whatever reason, social services decided to put the baby back with the father. Now, the foster mother was absolutely broken over this decision and tried to make it stop, and we're going to get to her testimony, as well as some other stuff that I looked into with her when we get to that in just a few minutes. Now, at this point, the state goes into a huge list of how the parents were not compliant with any of the regulations put into and on this stipulation of the baby going back with them. By March 28th, and this was after a huge amount of trying to get a hold of them, lies and all sorts of things, CPS made contact with the family, with baby Dylan on March 28th. There was no visible injuries at that point, but this is the last time that baby Dylan was ever seen alive by somebody. Now, April and May, the CPS was never able to get a hold of the parents. Now, eventually police had to get involved, and the state will go in and outline all the different circumstances that took place under. Then the state outlines what took place on June 10th, which is a search warrant was taken out, and this is where the standoff that I mentioned talks about. Jessica gave up pretty willingly, but the father, Daniel, there was like a 6-hour standoff with him. Now, they were taken into custody, and Jessica was telling them that, oh, CPS took the baby, da-da-da-da-da. Now, June 11th, Daniel takes them to the property, and this is basically a wild goose chase. He is, taking them to the wrong area, essentially. After the wild goose chase, Daniel does take them on another trip to the property, and this time he does lead them to the well, which was baby Dylan's final resting place. During the state's opening, they also list off all of the injuries found on baby Dylan. He had 2 skull fractures, 2 rib fractures. He had upper and lower arm fractures and lower leg fractures. Some of the breaks showed signs of healing and others didn't. He also tested positive for both methamphetamines and amphetamines again. Now let's discuss the defense's opening as well as their tactic. Now, the defendants, Daniel and Jessica, are being tried together, but they have different attorneys. Now, if you remember the Rosenbaum trial, and if you haven't watched that one, I highly suggest going and looking at this, because it was basically a study in what not to do. So the Rosenbaums, both of the couple was represented by one attorney, and most likely the male, the husband in that situation, Joe, I believe his name was, probably could have gotten a little bit of a better situation if he didn't go through with his wife Jennifer, who clearly was completely guilty on so many levels. Now, Joe, her husband, I think that's his name, I can't remember right now, he was definitely guilty and compliant in that situation, but by using the same attorney, he got kind of just as an afterthought in there. Now, in this case, what we see is we see 2 defense attorneys getting up, giving their opening statements, and essentially their tactic is going to be, look, Jessica is responsible for this crime. She is here to take accountability. Her husband, Daniel, he did not commit this crime. He helped cover up the crime after the fact, but he did not murder the baby, do anything like that. And it's an interesting legal tactic because, whether we like it or not, it's probably the smartest move they could make as the defense to try and save one of them. However, as we will see, there's really no excuse for either of this. They both were very complicit and lied so much along the way you just can't believe either of them. Now, the male defense lawyer gets up there and he's representing Miss Groves. Now, his demeanor is literally almost like he's embarrassed to get up there. There is very little one can say about this case, and as we learn from reading Kirk Nermy's book about representing Jodi Arias, you can only work with what you have, and so the defense, they have to do this. We have to keep that in mind. Everyone deserves a defense, even people like this, and so he's getting up there and literally he has nothing to work with. There really just isn't anything to say about the actions that these 2 people did. One thing that happens with some of these cases where it almost seems like even the defense doesn't believe their client, that translates to the audience, and by audience, I mean jury. Now, the defense's statement that he opens up with is a statement about the drug epidemic in this area of Ohio. Now, he says their community is ground zero for the opioid crisis in their area, and that they constantly hear about these horrible crimes taking place. The defense then lays out how individuals who have been led down the path of drug issues can start to combat their problems by taking accountability, taking responsibility for their actions. And he then is essentially pointing at his client and saying, and that's what she's here to do today. He says, my client, Jessica Groves, is a drug addict. There's no question about it. And then he says something that kind of shocks everyone. He says that she and she alone is the one that caused the injuries to baby Dylan, and she is here to take responsibility for those actions. He says that she's going to testify that she's the one that murdered the baby. He then goes in and addresses the injuries as well as the drugs found in the baby's system. Now, at this point, with an opening like this, that's a tall glass of water to drink. So I was like, I want to know what kind of a drug problem are we talking about in this county. So I went and looked up a little bit of information, and I'm just going to take a quick little side step here to tell you all about this. Okay, so Scioto, Ohio was like the drug capital, the pill mill capital of this area. It was literally eaten up with this epidemic. Doctors from all over the country would cycle through here, opening pill mills up, working at pill mills, so on and so forth, making tons of illicit money off of this epidemic. In 2019, a judge sentenced Margaret Temperanus. She was 55 years old. She got 7 years in federal prison. She marked one of the last cases that went to trial, got sentenced for running a pill mill. Now, there was like 20 of these that they busted before there. And in some of the stuff, they said that some of the doctors were so strung out on drugs themselves that they would have to, the workers that were working there would have to like wipe their chin while they talked to the patients or put a pen in their hand to help them scribble the scripts. I mean, this was literally a free-for-all with opioids. Now, that being said, does this excuse what happened? Can we just sit here and say, oh, sorry, they have a drug problem, they get a free pass? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The behaviors that they took, I have no doubt that there probably was some level of, oh, I'm waking up and what did I do? I can't believe I did this while I was strung out. But the behaviors before, after, in between everything are so inexcusable by them that it makes the defense's selling point of, this is a drug addict and she has this and that and she's going to take accountability. It makes it a very hard pill to swallow. It also doesn't help that even when she does get on the stand, which we'll talk about, she still isn't willing to take accountability. So there's very little shown in the evidence of any of this that this is a person filled with regret that they had a drug problem and that said drug problem led them to accidentally harming their child. So let's continue with the defense's opening. Now he addresses the jury and says, now you might want to know, why is she here on trial to do this if she's going to admit to this? And he's like, because she's taking responsibility now. And he says part of that responsibility is doing the right thing, and part of the right thing is defending an innocent man. He says that Daniel had nothing to do with any of this, that he was foolishly unaware of what Jessica was doing, using drugs, abusing the kid, whatever. He says that baby Dylan died on March 28th and that Daniel found him unresponsive. Panic set in, confusion set in. From all that panic and fear and whatnot, he helped hide the body. He helped make the casket. He went and put it in the well. And that was pretty much his opening defense. So it was a very weak one, but again, that's most likely all he has to work with, because we will see that even these own witnesses negate their own stories as they go along. Now, next, Daniel's attorney gets up there, and this is a lady, she's representing him, and she starts off by thanking the jury and going over all that. She takes it a little bit too far. It's fine to thank them, but don't go on and on. We get it, it's a horrible trial, but don't pander. She seems very unsure of herself up there, and honestly, I don't really blame her. There's really just not much you can say to this. She reminds the jury that it's the state's burden to do this. She agrees that Daniel had nothing to do with the crime. She says that they're going to argue that yes, Jessica was the only one that actually caused harm to this baby. So let's go ahead and get into some of the witnesses that got on the stand. We hear from several hospital staff about when Jessica and Daniel arrived to the hospital. They said that when she went into labor, she was very removed and flat, like she just wasn't even there. At some point, it was divulged that she had gotten high on heroin a couple of days prior. She tested positive for methamphetamines. They said when the baby was born, he was very dusky and pale. He needed oxygen, and that's where they took him into the nursery, put him on oxygen. They said the parents just acted like they never even asked to go see him. They were just completely removed from the situation. Now, a large part of this case was the social services people testifying. And this is always really difficult to hear because we see this time and time again when they get up there and we see how these situations fall through the cracks and you're just scratching your head like, why does this happen? So let's talk about some of the stuff that came out with their testimony. So it was confirmed that yes, there was a meeting held. It was decided to put baby Dylan into foster care, and that if Daniel, the father, could test negative for drugs, that they would place him back with him. Now, she testified that on January 25th, there was a meeting with Jessica and Daniel. They had a 1-hour visit with Dylan during this time. Now, on the 28th, the baby was returned to the father. Now, this is where the foster mother was like, oh my God, no, are you crazy? Please do not do this. But they sided with the parents. This is the parent of baby Dylan, so baby Dylan got to go back. Now, the caseworker did testify that part of this condition of the baby going with Daniel was that Jessica could not be living at the residence. I have no idea why they think that would actually happen and why they would actually fool themselves. I don't even know how this couple could play that off, that they would do that, because they just seem so but, even up there in the stand, and they were sober at this point that we're seeing them. So during this time where they're probably still strung out, I'm just like, how would you ever even think to put a child with these people? Now, the caseworker did do a follow-up visit on February 4th to go visit baby Dylan at the home. Now, the caseworker says on February 4th when they went that everybody was there. And by everybody, I mean Jessica, Daniel Jr., their son, who was 14 at the time, and baby Dylan. Now, the caseworker did testify that Jessica said she still had to keep going to drug treatment programs, which were a part of the requirement of, getting back with her children, her family. The next contact that was made, or attempted contact, I should say, is February 21st. Now, there was no answer at the door when the caseworker visited. So the caseworker left a note in the door and then actually went to Daniel Jr.'s school and left a note for him. Now, the caseworker was able to make contact a few days later on February 25th, and she noted that Dylan was fine at that time. Now, this time, Jessica said that she was staying the night with people. She wasn't spending the night at the house, but that she was there during the daytime. Well, I mean, you already know that this is not true. I mean, these are the things that I'm just like, really? How does this even happen? So at this point in time, the caseworker did not notice any injuries on Dylan. Now, the next time that contact was to be made was March 18th. Now, the caseworker said that on the morning of the 18th, when the visit was supposed to happen, that she received a call from Daniel, and he was saying that basically his father had a heart attack and that he's had to go out of town. They rescheduled this visit to the 21st, and so the 21st, the caseworker goes over there to the house. Nobody is home. She received a voicemail later that day from Daniel saying, look, my dad's he got worse. We're still, out of town. So on March 27th, there was a juvenile court hearing. Now, the mother, Jessica, as well as the father, Daniel, everyone was supposed to be present there. Only Jessica showed up to this, and so the caseworker was like, well, look, Jessica, that's not how this works. You need to tell your husband that when you see him, that I'm going to be there tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., and he needs to be there. So on the morning of the 28th, she goes over there, and Jessica and Daniel are both there amazingly. Now, she will also testify that she didn't ask him why he wasn't in court, which just blows my mind. She said during this visit that Jessica was holding baby Dylan, she was giving him a bottle, she didn't see any injuries, and he seemed to be fine. Now, during the same visit, Jessica asked if she could move back into the home, which you already know she probably was already living there. And the caseworker was like, well, I'll have to talk to my manager and find out, my supervisor. They had a hearing scheduled April 3rd, but that got rescheduled. Now, the next home visit was supposed to be April 9th, but the caseworker got a text from Daniel, and he said, hey, look, I've had some bad luck. We'll get back with you. Now, the caseworker said that she had 4 different phone numbers that Daniel was contacting her from, and she couldn't get him on any of those phone numbers. Now, by April 17th, she had had no contact, and she also learned that Jessica had not been compliant with her drug stuff. Now, the next hearing was April 18th. That next day, neither Jessica nor Daniel showed. Now, April 19th, Daniel sends a text message to the caseworker, and he says, I just want to let you know we're still up north. The baby's growing like a weed, and he talks about how rough it's been on them not having a phone. Now, we already know at this point that the baby is dead at this point. I mean, this is just absolutely horrendous. So this just goes into showing you how much they're already covering up. Clearly, the baby died, the baby was murdered, whatever took place, and they went off on a bender. Like, they just quit doing everything. They didn't know what to do. So April 19th, the caseworker goes to the house with the sheriff. Nobody's home. So she leaves a note in the door and leaves. April 23rd, she comes back. Nobody's home. But the items on the porch, she can tell that people have been there. Like, stuff looks different than it did before. So at this point, she goes to Daniel Jr.'s school. And this part just shocks me because I'm like, for all the lies that the parents are telling, I'm like, how quickly that unravels. So the son says that, yeah, Jessica is staying at home, but then he changed that to saying, well, sometimes she is. So then the caseworker asks about his grandfather. And Daniel Jr. is basically like, who? Like, he has no idea who she's talking about. So it becomes clearly obvious that things are very wrong in this situation. So the caseworker goes back to the office. It's decided that both children are going to go into care. They go back. They take Daniel Jr. He's, remember, 14 years old. They get him. They place him with his aunt and uncle. Now, the caseworker was with Daniel Jr.'s aunt and uncle when his father texted aunt and uncle saying, why isn't Daniel at our house? Why is he over with you? So the caseworker's like in on all this, seeing all this take place. So later that night, Daniel texts the caseworker saying, "Why did you take Daniel Jr. from us?" I'm like, the audacity. Number one, like, you damn well know why they did. So the caseworker just goes to their house, bangs on the door, knocks on the door, no one comes to the door, and she's like, both of their cars are there. Now on April 30th, she filed a missing persons report on Dylan. Now she says that she also wanted to do an Amber Alert, but that the higher ups were like, no, don't do an Amber Alert because it's going to look really bad on us that we lost a child. Which I'm just like, really? Are you kidding me? This is disgusting. Now we know hindsight is that wouldn't have done any good because sadly baby Dylan was no longer with us, but nonetheless it just shows you the brokenness of the system. Now on June 10th, that's when, you know, all this went down. The parents were arrested and the police go back to this caseworker and they're like, look, they're saying that you took the baby months ago. And she's like, oh my God, no. And this, you know, realization starts to come out. And even on the stand, I mean, she gets broken up over this. After the caseworker, the foster mother gets up there, and this was, I mean, oh my God, y'all, this is so sad. This poor lady, everyone involved in this, it just, their hearts were broken. Now, she had Daniel for like 12 days before he was put back with the father. It was very emotional testimony. You know, she had helped baby Dylan overcome his detoxing by swaddling him and holding him and helping him through the shakes. She begged child services not to put him back with the family. I mean, she knew something bad was going to happen. And she even said that she was like trying to find out, like over the months, like, look, how is the baby doing? She was always told fine, but basically, look, you can't be interfering and, you know, messing up his transitioning period back with his family by sticking your nose in the business type situation. So it's very sad to see, obviously, someone who truly cared about this baby. It wasn't even her baby. And then the baby's put with these people who, they didn't want this kid, obviously. Now, at one point on the stand, the foster mother just breaks down and the jury is sent out. Now, other emotional testimony came from some of the rescue workers. You know, one of them started breaking down when he was talking about pulling the crate out of the ground and describing what the crate looked like. I mean, it gives me goosebumps right now to think that someone could do that with their child. Now he describes this contraption, this makeshift coffin, as 2 crates put together, had a chain around it, a bunch of rocks in it, padlocks, all this stuff to keep it, you know, obviously from coming back up in the well. Now another firefighter was talking about the smell was so bad of decomposition that it overtook him when they were trying to pull the crate out of the ground. Now the forensic pathologist got up there, Susan Brown, and a lot of you might remember her from the Brooke Schuyler trial. That was the young lady who went on trial for allegedly killing her, having birth in her home and killing the baby. She was found not guilty except for gross abuse of a corpse. And a lot of people had stuff to say about this medical examiner because essentially it came out in trial that what she was alleging happened in the beginning didn't really technically happen that way. And it was very scandalous for that trial. So now in this trial, Susan, again, she's the forensic pathologist for this. She says there was basically 3 different incidents that happened on baby Dylan according to the various healing rates that she saw with the injuries. She did say that it was in her belief that the baby was already dead when he was put in the well. Thank God. Now, because of decomposition and whatnot, she couldn't give an exact cause of death, so she ruled it as a homicidal violence, which that's essentially like, look, this wasn't a natural cause, but we can't tell what exactly this was, so we put this label on it. Like, we know it was murder. Now, another bit of shocking testimony and insight into this case was the police interview, the detectives that interviewed them. Now, the detective said that Jessica's demeanor was very standoffish, she was cold, she didn't want to be there, and this detective interviewed both Jessica and Daniel after the arrest. She said both of them insisted that the baby had been taken by CPS at first. She also said that Daniel was dope sick. Dope sick meaning he's moaning, he's in pain, he's coming off opioids of some sort, and it's, you know, messing with him physically. Now the detective says that Daniel told her that he found the baby in the crib dead, no one harmed the baby, you know, almost like a SIDS type situation. Now she also said that at one point she tried showing Jessica pictures of the baby and she refused to look at them. Now the next thing that they do is they show the police interview, the videotape of it. This is shocking testimony. This really bothered a lot of people because in this we see how much these parents do not care. Now Daniel is just lying as hard as he can go about everything, and he is literally like, why would I lie about this, and why would I have any motivation to lie, and about the locations and whatever else he could lie about. Now at one point they allow Jessica to come in and talk to him, and they're basically like, look, we're gonna, because you've done everything that you could do, you know, you did take us out to the property. Now at this point he has basically led them to the wrong place in the property. And that's what he's like, no, I'm telling you, I wouldn't lie about that. But they're playing along with him, and they're like, look, you've done good, we'll let Jessica come in here, you just can't make out, God help me, or anything like that. And he's like, okay, cool. So they bring Jessica in. Now, during this conversation that they have, we learn that Jessica's very worried about their dogs at home. She talks about how cold it is in jail. These are the things that when you look at what she's saying, how they're acting, if you were their defense attorney, you would be like, oh my God, how do I get around this? There is no way. Now, they'll also present jailhouse calls where Jessica insists to her half-sister that, no, I didn't do it. And so there's that. And so at one point with this detective on the stand, it's like, they're trying to insinuate, like, well, how cooperative was he? And the detective's like, if you consider lying cooperative, then he was very cooperative. Another heartbreaking testimony was from their son, Daniel Jr. This is awful when a child has to be put in this situation. God knows what this poor child has lived through his whole life, and then to have to get up there and testify against your parents. I mean, what a horrible thing to put your kid through. Now, he's 15 at this time. His guardian, they said, no, I don't want his image on TV, so they didn't show him on there, thank God. I think that's the appropriate thing to do. Now, Daniel Jr. will testify about some of the injuries that he saw in the baby, specifically on the head. And he says that he saw bruising, like purple and black marks, and pretty much all over the baby's head. Now, he says that the injuries did seem to kind of go away after a spell, and then a couple of weeks later is when the baby disappeared. Now, he says that his parents told him that the baby was injured because he got caught in a dream catcher. Now, if you don't know what a dream catcher is, I'll put a little picture up here of one. But typically, it's really hard to imagine how one would get hurt in a dream catcher. But later, we'll hear from some testimony that the dream catcher fell in the crib and his arm got caught in it, and maybe he did like this, and this little pebble on it hit his head. But y'all know, this is, if you could come up with a lie, and you're like, oh my God, I have to come up with a lie, how did this bruise get here? Probably the last thing you want to say is that a dream catcher did it. That's like saying, I fell on my down pillow and broke my arm. It's just not going to happen. Now, he says that he did not harm the baby, and he doesn't know who did. Now, another hard piece of evidence is they are asked about him giving urine to his parents, specifically his father, to pass drug test. He says that, yeah, I gave the urine mostly to my father. Then they also have him confirm that, yeah, in early November, he confronted his mother about being pregnant, and she said that she was pregnant. So here we begin to see, you can already see the lies that the parents are telling, but this whole story of, I didn't know I was pregnant, these things just kind of fall apart as the testimony goes on. Now, what takes the cake is Jessica takes the stand. Y'all, okay, now the court system shut down for the holidays. This is really our first kind of big trial back. It did not disappoint. I could not believe what I was watching when this took place. So she gets up there, and her head is hung low. And now, let me tell you what, as it should be. Her and Daniel are sitting over that defense table with their heads hung down almost the entire part of this trial. Which, what else would you do if you were them? That is literally the only thing you do, is to hold your head in shame. Now, I'll say this, and unless Jessica insisted on taking the stand, I have no idea why she did. It was probably the most idiotic move I've ever seen. I am guessing that she insisted on doing it. But the defense gets up there and establishes that Daniel had nothing to do with the crime. And that's essentially all that was there. Now, the state gets up there and she comes in hot. She is up there and she's like, tell them how you murdered baby Dylan. There was like no chill with the state prosecutor. She was exhibiting the anger, and it was believable because at this point in the case, if you're watching it, you almost can't help but be angry. So this is another case where the prosecutor's feelings match the audience. Most likely they are matching what the jury is feeling. A lot of times when we see prosecutors get up and they exhibit this level of anger too early or too late or whatever, it makes it just as unbelievable as the defense trying to tell us that this was because she was a drug addict. Now, when the state says, tell us how you murdered baby Dylan, Jessica's like, it was an accident. And the state's like, not your excuse. Tell us how you murdered the baby. It was a very interesting choice of words, what she was doing. Because even when she was saying it was an accident, not what your excuse is, because no matter if it was an accident, it murdered the baby. And so it was very interesting tactic. I was like, that's good. And this is one way for prosecutors or defense people, whoever, your choice of words, though a lot of times it might not seem like they might have a great magnitude or weight to them, they really really, really do in the perception of how people are going to view, the context of what you're talking about. Now, Jessica finally says that she dropped the baby. Now, there are sobs and all this stuff going on. I don't know if they're real. And her and the state are going back and forth. And finally, Jessica snaps. And I have a feeling the state was kind of wanting this to happen. Jessica screams at the state, "You devoured my family!" Now, her and the state get in this yelling match. I was shocked to see this. I don't think I've ever seen this in a court case. Because there's been some places where I'm like, I want to see them yelling at each other, but it happened here. But Jessica stands by that this was an accident. She's like, "I would never hurt my babies. That was an accident. My mind wasn't clear." Now, the judge is finally like, "Oh my God, y'all, I've had enough." And the judge is like, "Look, Jessica, if you can't reel it in, honey, you're going to have to go." Okay? And so basically, they send the jury out. I mean, this was one of those trials where the jury was just like, "Okay, y'all, let's get them out. We got another breakdown going on." And they send the jury out, and just, the defense, all those people stay in there. Now, the redirect for Jessica, I mean, bless his heart. He gets up there and he says, "Jessica," like he's trying to get through to her or something. And she's like, "Yes." And he's like, "Everything you're saying is the truth?" And she's like, "Yes." And he's like, "You're finally coming clean." And she's like, "Yes." And he's like, "This room is clear." And that was kind of it. Now, the other defense gets up there and basically just confirms, like, "Okay, so you're the one who killed the baby, or, you're the one who was responsible for that." "Yes." And she's like, "Daniel didn't have anything to do with that." "No." And she's like, "The dream catcher did it." "Yes." And that was pretty much it. There's just really not much you can say, and it was their best tactic to just end that parade immediately. Now, the next part is that Daniel takes the stand. While Daniel is up there, the defense starts in, and they're like, "Let's just clear the air on this." And this is something that they always do in cases where they want to get the defendant's past crimes out on the table in case, because it's going to come up and it's going to look bad. But I mean, he was convicted of some kind of like shoplifting thing from Kroger. And, she was like, "This could be a dishonest crime." Well, yeah, it could be, but in the scale of things, it's kind of like that doesn't even get near what he's being accused of. So, but thanks for letting us know. Now, Daniel has an excuse for every single thing. Now, he says, like, even the urine that he was collecting was for a friend. That he wasn't doing that. And he's like, "I know it was wrong to collect it for a friend." And you already know that he's just making this up because we've already seen him confirmed. We know he was lying, and he did it very easily. Now, he says that Jessica never harmed or never did anything that would really make him think that she would harm or hurt the child. He says that the baby died a few hours after the social worker left on March 28th. Now, he says that he didn't even know she was pregnant, and he says that she didn't go to prenatal appointments because she was too high to go, but that he didn't know that information until after the fact. Now, he says that 5 minutes after they arrived to the hospital is when he found out that she had never gone to any of these appointments and that she lied about all this stuff. Now, he says that when they arrived at the hospital, he was afraid to answer their questions. He wanted to protect Jessica, which is understanding it's his spouse, whatever. But he also said that he was intimidated by her. And this will come up again and again, where essentially she's like, "You're going to take the blame for this baby dying." And that's what he's kind of saying. Like, "Look, I was afraid I did this because I thought I was going to take the blame for it. I'm the guy I thought I was going to get blamed for this." He says that also she would always threaten to leave him and all sorts of manipulative tactics like this. Daniel also confirms the dream catcher story about the bruise on baby Dylan's head. And, the whole thing, "Oh, I thought he got the dream catcher caught on him and he started flailing around and hit his head," and so on and so forth. Daniel does say, "Look, the baby died a few hours after the social worker left. We went into his crib. He was there. He was dead." And he's like, "I freaked out, and in that panic and fear, and Jessica's sitting here telling me, 'You're going to get blamed. You're going to get blamed.' I then made the coffin and disposed of the body." Now, the state gets up there and basically rips all this apart. She confirms that he did lie about being employed. She confirms that, yes, he had asked his son to get him urine for himself or whatever. And he's like, "Well, my son was just confused about the dates," because now Daniel is saying that he never did that after the baby was born. Like, those were old things. The prosecutor says, "Well, the nurse says she saw that you were high when you went into the hospital. Was she lying?" And he's like, "She was mistaken." Now, the state also goes into other things that he said in the past. And she was like, "Don't you remember telling detectives that you had seen your wife hit baby Dylan a couple of times?" And he's like, "Well, I think I told them that I dreamt that." She brings up all these other things that Jessica allegedly did, like threatening to hurt the baby baby if he didn't buy her Coke. You know, him saying that he had actually seen the baby get struck 4 times by Jessica. So the prosecutor's just going through this ripping it apart. And obviously, it's a selling point to the jury and to the audience because we've seen him lie so much already. Now, y'all, the closing arguments, there's really not much you can say at this point. The state did a great job. The defense did what they could. You know, so the state gets up there. They're going to shake that little coffin around, which, I mean, my God, I just can't imagine. And she's going to, again, go over the charges and why they are charging them with this. Look, here's this charge here, and this is how we proved it in our case. You know, there you go, jury. Please find him guilty. Do the right thing. Thank you. Goodbye. Now, the defense comes in there, and he is trying to act super mad. And this is what I'm talking about when we see an attorney, doesn't matter if it's the state or the defense, and they are trying to exude an emotion that doesn't match what other people are feeling. It's basically like not taking the temperature of the room. And at this point in the game, the last thing we probably want to see from the defense attorney is for him to get up there and act pissed off that Jessica was forced to come in here to protect an innocent man. None of us believe that. There's nothing that you have shown. I get you need to do a closing argument, but that kind of stuff right there you can just leave out because you're not matching what the evidence has shown. So we believe the anger from the state way more than the defense at this point. He also has the audacity to talk about what a good wife she is to Daniel, and I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, don't even say that. Don't even say that. This would be a better situation to go the whole route of, you know what, she did A, B, and C, but type situation. And he brings up, you know, again, the drug use and things like that, and that it's not an excuse, but she's taking responsibility. And essentially, they just reiterate that Daniel didn't kill the baby. That's the whole point of this trial. Now, y'all already know this verdict did not take long, y'all. I think it literally took them the amount of time to fill the paperwork out. I'm being slightly dramatic when I say that. It was about 2.5 hours. Jessica was found guilty of all charges. Now, Daniel was found guilty of all charges except for aggravated murder. When they read his charges off and they did the not guilty, I was like, oh my God, are they going to find not guilty? Are they going to find not guilty? But it was only on the aggravated murder, and they hit him with the rest of them. Jessica guilty on all charges. Now, Jessica Groves was sentenced to life without parole plus 32 years. Daniel Groves was sentenced to 47 years. They will never leave prison. These are very heinous crimes, and if something doesn't like happen to them in there because of the crimes, I mean, they're not young. You know what I'm saying? Jessica for sure isn't, and the husband 47 years. I mean, come on. So, you know, this is not to negate any kind of like actual real drug problems that might take place with somebody, but situations like this just don't fit it. So that's it. If you're still with me here, I really appreciate it. This was a very interesting trial. I definitely suggest if you want to watch the whole thing, this is one worth watching. There's a lot of really interesting legal tactics being done in this. So if you're a student out there who's watching this, definitely check the whole trial out and go see for yourself what you think of it. Anyways, I appreciate you spending time with me, and I'll see you later.